And welcome to the Legal Lounge here on CRN Digital Talk Radio, crntalk.com, streaming live coast to coast and around the world on crntalk.com. Also available in stunning high-definition video, facebook.com/CRN Talk. Also on CRN's custom-built Roku channel, TikiLive.com, and of course, crntalk.com. I'm joined, as always, by the one and the only, an active attorney, U.S. Army veteran, Juris Doctorate in Law, undergraduate degree in physics, and author of a book that has proven to be a guideline for the Supreme Court now and in the future. That book, America, An Illusion of Freedom, is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and on iTunes. Make sure to check out Richard, too, on AM 870 The Answer. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Richard Nixon, and the show that gives you the news you get nowhere else. How are you, Richard?
Just fine. Every day I hope I can live up to the accolades you give me, Mike. You're very generous.
Well deserved.
Thank you. Today, just on a little bit light here, Trump is still in the midst of appointing or nominating people for his upcoming administration. One that I'm proud to mention again because she is a friend of the show, and that is Harmeet Dillon. I think that's kind of a French slang on that. She happens to be a native of Chandigarh in India's Punjab state. And she was raised in North Carolina, went to the University of Virginia. And she's been picked to be an assistant attorney general for civil rights under, what's her name?
Mrs. Pam Bondi.
Pam Bondi, you got it right.
Quite
so, Harmeet Dillon, managing partner of so-and-so and so-and-so, has been nominated to a key position in the U.S. Department of Justice. Trump nominated her because of her knowledge of the law, and she took part in the Supreme Court case in which the justices ruled that Congress, not the states, had to determine whether Trump was eligible for the presidency. So in the Colorado case, the Supreme Court had ruled that Trump had engaged in insurrection and was therefore disqualified. Ms. Dillon undid that, and his name was Trump's name was put back on the Colorado ballot. And apparently that worked because he's president now, or about to be.
Yeah, and if you can actually listen to those oral arguments on oyes.org to the Colorado case of the Supreme Court, and she was very skilled as a litigator and presented very forceful arguments, which obviously the Supreme Court took to heart. Also, Richard, we have some news out of California where we see this a lot, sadly. We have a immigration law firm being sanctioned by the state bar.
Yes, very briefly, the state bar seized the offices of an unauthorized immigration law practice in Los Angeles, alleging it defrauded Filipino immigrants by falsely claiming to be operated by a licensed attorney. The person's last name is Esperanza, and I have it on good sources that probably is a Filipino name. So we have a Filipino, if you will, cheating other Filipinos, claiming that they could get them green cards when they could not. They took their money, sent them to certain schools, and all of this was for naught. Anyway, the state bar took action, and they've taken I don't know how many files and boxes of documents, and they've shut them down. Very good.
So these attorneys probably were going to face sanction from the state bar, but perhaps criminal charges moving forward as well. All right, folks, we're going to have a great show today. We're going to talk about a lot of interesting topics. We're going to circle back and talk about that unconditional discharge situation for President Trump. We're also going to talk about redundancy, the rules construction when it comes to Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7. We're also going to talk about some interesting reporting about what President Trump's going to do. Monday, President Trump becomes President Trump once again, and he's got a lot of things he wants to get done vis-a-vis immigration. So stick around, you guys. We're here in the Legal Lounge. Stay with us. And we are back in the Legal Lounge, CRN Digital Talk Radio, CRNTalk.com. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. This show always illuminates me, Richard, through Richard's expertise on all things law, and I hope you enjoy it. You can also check out all past and previous sessions of this broadcast available on Rumble, also on YouTube. Find CRN Digital Talk on both those platforms. Also as a podcast, CRNTalk.com/podcast there. All right, Richard, we talked about Judge Merchan and the last kind of legal case facing Mr. Trump, and he was sentenced last week. We talked about it briefly last week, but we've really got some time to sink our teeth into this. And the unconditional discharge. And friend of the show, Alan Dershowitz, was hopping mad about this. He called this a sneaky move, and he called this trickery. Judge Merchan practiced trickery against the Supreme Court's quotes. This is from Mr. Dershowitz, Professor Dershowitz. I devised the term lawfare. I wrote about it in the late 60s, and it became this horrible, horrible thing that has been used against American democracies. Of course, New York suffers. Of course, Trump won. But the ultimate loser is the American people. What Judge Merchan did was so sleazy and sneaky. He announced in advance that he wouldn't sentence him to jail. Look, I've been doing this for 62 years. I've never had a judge tell me in advance what the sentence was going to be, Mr. Dershowitz continues. In fact, when I'd bring my clients to the courtroom for sentencing, I would have them to bring their toothbrush because I never knew if they were going home or going to prison.
Absolutely.
But he did this, Merchan, did this purposely in order to get the Supreme Court now and to take the case now. And the two justices fell for his ploy. They said, Merchan's not sending him to jail. He's not sending him to jail, so we're going to go ahead and not stop the case. He's talking about the Supreme Court refusing to take in a 9-0 decision Mr. Trump's appeal regarding the sentencing. Do you agree with Mr. Dershowitz here, Richard?
I do not. But, of course, Mr. Dershowitz kind of wrote this article prematurely because he talked about a case called Younger versus Harris, a 1971 case, Supreme Court case, which basically says it's the so-called abstention doctrine. Doctrine, of course, meaning that the Supreme Court made up this rule as opposed to Congress. And basically what it says is that the federal government will not get involved in pending cases within the state. That is to say, as long as a case has not been finally decided, if the people in the state court, one of the attorneys decides this has to be appealed, we have to take it to the Supreme Court. Sorry, the Supreme Court will not handle it until the case is final. And Mr. Chemerinsky, I think, wrote this article before the Judge Merchan had made his final decision of no jail time, no probation, no nothing, which, of course, is, according to Alan Dershowitz, friend of the court, of course, 34 times 0 is 0. That's the way he described it. He will never describe Mr. Trump as a convicted felon because he is not. If you think about it in this sense. If any person gets convicted of a felony, no matter how many, now in this case 34, and yet the judge looks him square in the eyes, or in this case it was virtual, and he sentenced him to 0 time. Now, the judge could very easily have done the following. Now, he could have said, I'm going to give you 4 years in jail, suspended. I'm going to give you probation, which is summary probation, which means you don't have to appear, but you will have a probation officer, and you're going to have certain conditions of probation. Several like don't open your big mouth and criticize me or the court anymore. And that would have been it. That's proper. It happens all the time for DUIs and other kinds of cases. Instead, he chickened out, and it's my position he chickened out because he finally realized this case is baloney. And when it goes up to appeal, every judge is concerned with how the courts of appeal and the Supreme Court will view them as as a judge, because if they ever get in a position where they might be elevated to the Court of Appeal or the Supreme Court, they have to appear knowledgeable. And for this judge to have gone any further than he did, his only choice was to recognize that we would be interfering with an upcoming president-elect. However, that's not an excuse.
Yeah.
Since when does a judge say, okay, you've been found guilty of 34 felonies, but ABC, so I can't sentence you. No, he could have sentenced him anyway and done exactly what I said. Find him guilty, sentence him to 4 years per each one, put him on probation, and so on. So this whole thing is baloney, and I have lost total respect for this particular person as a judge, and I think he's going to rue the day that he did it.
Well, let me
woe the day makes sense too.
Yeah,
actually,
he'll be having a day of woe. Let me defend Judge Mershon,
please,
real fast here, Richard. I think that Judge Mershon actually was in a terrible predicament here. I think the person that really deserves blame here is Alvin Bragg. Alvin Bragg, of course, is the one that brought these charges. He's the state official from New York who campaigned on the fact that he wanted to hold President Trump to account, whatever that means. And Mr. Bragg knew that this was, not going to end well for him. He could have dropped the charges.
Okay, but wait a minute. In opposition to that, Mike, we've talked about this before. There is a thing called judgment notwithstanding the verdict, JNOV. Now, it's normally used in a civil action, which basically means that the losing party in that case says to the judge, Your Honor, they didn't present these elements, sufficient facts to award whatever the jury awarded. In other words, something's missing here, and the judge can review the record, and if he sees, sure enough, they didn't have one element about maybe justifiable reliance in a fraud case, and the judge can reverse the verdict, and that's the end of it. Even though the jury found him liable, the judge can reverse it because the judge is convinced the plaintiff did not meet his burden. Okay, now, this discharge thing that he calls, it's a lot like a dismissal, but it's a criminal thing. He could very easily have said just that. I have reviewed the documents. I find that the prosecutor did not meet his burden, and therefore I find that I must dismiss or do whatever I have to do. But he couldn't let go of that conviction in his court. So what I'm saying is,
I think I agree with you. I think I agree with you on that point, Richard. Because what he could have done, this is tough though. Because what he could have done is, post-conviction, pre-sentencing, he could have just put this whole case on the shelf and says, well, you know what, we really need more instruction from the higher courts of appeals, especially when it comes to the presidential immunity rulings.
Not only that, but you see what he can do anytime a judge is somewhat ambiguous on an issue. He orders the two attorneys, I want more briefing on this issue. You tell me whether or not these are legitimate claims against Mr. Trump, or is he exempt because he's president, et cetera, et cetera. He could have done that, and then based upon that stuff, he could have decided that, you know what, I'm sorry, I hate to do this. I think Mr. Trump is a crook, but I'm forced to dismiss this whole matter.
Yeah, but I think just based on the timeline, I think he probably couldn't have got that done he could have if he wanted to, before Trump took office. And so if he did do that, put this case on the shelf and says, we're going to wait for more adjudication about the immunity, and then Trump takes office, we have this nightmare scenario where Trump is facing this lawfare while he's president. We're going to talk more about this after the break, you guys.
Yes.
We're here in the Legal Lounge, CRN Digital Talk Radio, crntalk.com. As always, make sure to check out Richard's fantastic book, America: An Illusion of Freedom. It's available on Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, and on iTunes. Stay with us. And we are back in the Legal Lounge. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. We really appreciate it. As always, you can check out our complete archives available on YouTube and on Rumble, where we're speaking freely. Find CRN Digital Talk on both those platforms. All right, Richard, we're talking about this unconditional discharge. This is the New York case, the Stormy Daniels hush money case. And I just want to say something real fast. I have a circle of friends and family that, are dyed-in-the-wool liberals. And even they said that this is the case that they thought they didn't care about. They didn't care about this case at all. It was money. It was a porn star. It was an affair. Doesn't really matter. And they always, even, laymen who, didn't follow this as closely as you and I did, thought this was the weakest case of them all. But Judge Mershon and Alvin Bragg wanted to push forward on this. So we talked about Younger versus Harris, where Mr. Dershowitz wanted the judge, the courts to step in here and do more. But like you said, Richard, as you pointed out, Younger versus Harris, 1971, federal courts can't intervene until state-level cases have been adjudicated. And so now this case has been adjudicated. What is the next move moving forward? Obviously, do you think that President Trump, he wants to remove that, I think, unfair convicted felon moniker from his title? Can he appeal the conviction wholesale at this point?
Let me ask you a question, Mike.
Sure.
Was Judge Mershon elected or appointed?
Oh, that's a good question.
Now, that's a good question, because he may have been playing to his base there. If he's going to be elected, and that is really a pro Democrat situation there, he's worried about being reelected. Now, that could explain one thing, but the other thing is this, and I know we've mentioned this before, but I had a brainstorm the other night, and it occurred to me that redundancy and surplusage is the answer to so much of this stuff that was presented against Mr. Trump. Now, we all know Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7 talks about the fact that you must, if you're going to get rid of the president, in other words, you want to remove him from office because what he's done has been so bad, then what you have to do is you have to present articles of impeachment to the House. Majority of the House has to allege these articles, send them to the Senate, and the Senate, by 2/3 of those present at the time, will have a trial. And if 2/3 of those present say guilty, then the president, under Article 1, Section 7, Section 3, Clause 7, is removed from office. Now, let's reflect on that just for a second. This is such a big deal that we've got literally half of the country saying that whatever the president has done is so egregious that we, the people, say he's got to go. Now, contrast that with somebody like an Alvin Bragg, one person, frankly, a lower echelon person. He's not the Attorney General. I think he's simply a county attorney. He decides that Alvin Bragg, is going to present these 34 causes of action against a president, which could result in 4 years times 34 to remove the president. Now, are we thinking at all about the fact that if that's true, if we allow someone like Alvin Bragg to literally remove the president from office by incarceration, what in the hell do we need the impeachment clause for? Why would we have to go through all that trouble with getting all the House of Representatives, or half, and 2/3 of the Senate in order to throw the president out, when we can just get a guy like Alvin Bragg and remove him? The point is the very fact that the only thing mentioned in the Constitution is the impeachment clause. All one has to do is look up one of the rules of construction that talks about redundancy. If you could do it via the Alvin Bragg way, then you've just rendered the impeachment clause redundant or surplusage. You don't need it. And the attorneys and judges all know we cannot interpret any legal document such that anything is redundant or surplusage. Therefore, all of these actions that were brought against Mr. Trump, whether they be the hush money case, the Mar-a-Lago case, the January 6th case, the Georgia case, none of these are legitimate, and they should have all died in the womb.
Yeah, it's we've talked extensively about the impeachment judgment clause on this show, and the logic that you just proposed there, Richard, seems extraordinarily sound. because the framers, this is what they wanted. When it first started with civil litigation and also criminal litigation, that you don't want George Washington having to ride his horse to all these different jurisdictions. He would never get anything done. We're going to talk more about this because I think this is kind of a fascinating logical exercise. Stick around, you guys. We're here in the Legal Lounge, CRN Digital Talk Radio, crntalk.com. Stay with us. Okay, I just want to do a little bit more on this. And we are back in the Legal Lounge, CRN Digital Talk Radio, crntalk.com. We're talking about Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7. I'm going to read it real fast. Judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than removal from office and disqualifications to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States. But the party convicted, underline that, convicted, shall nevertheless be liable and subject to indictment, trial, judgment, and punishment according to law. So several of these issues, specifically when it came to the J6 case, Richard, were already adjudicated by the second impeachment of Donald Trump, which he was found not guilty.
Exactly.
And so it seems like there's a double jeopardy argument there. We've talked about that as well. But just reading that language, and we talked about this in our prep session, they would have just written there, well, we can charge you, that you're subject to the courts. And there would have been something in Article 1 or even in Article 3, which covers the judiciary, which will allow for the federal courts to step in and correct wrongdoing, sanction and correct wrongdoing by the chief executive. But according to the text of the United States Constitution, the impeachment judgment clause, this is solely up to the United States Congress. That through the Judiciary Committee, that would then draft articles of impeachment, which would then go to a full vote in the United States House. That's the indictment, and then the trial would take place in the Senate. That's what they wrote. They wrote that several times. Impeachment is I think in Article 1, 2, and 3. And for Alvin Bragg and for other federal prosecutors especially to come in and charge crimes, some say that occurred while President Trump was president, goes in the face of those laws of construction that you spoke about.
Absolutely, and these are not accidents. These rules of construction are no different than rules of grammar. And just to give a simple example, the word to, if I just say the word to now, the average person doesn't know whether I mean T-O, T-O-O, or T-W-O. It depends upon the context. So if I said, come to me, it's T-O. If I said, I want to go to, it's T-O-O. If there were two people there, it's T-W-O. So we have to look at the context to see what was meant. And by the same token, we attorneys, people who interpret legal documents, we have so-called rules of construction. And when it looks as though the writer of the document used two different words to say the same thing, that is considered redundant, and we do our best to not interpret it just that way. We have to figure out what does the second one mean. If there's different words, we can't construe them as meaning the same. The reason I mention that is because the 14th Amendment, Section 1, which talks about any person born or naturalized in this country, in the United States, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, shall be a citizen of the United States and the state wherein they reside. Now, that has been the word born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction. Those two entities, if you will, have been construed to mean the same thing. Yeah, he's born here and he's subject to our jurisdiction. It's the same thing. No. A basic rule of construction says you cannot look at two things with different wording and say they mean the same thing. So it's too obvious to even require an argument. And therefore, since the 60s, Ted Kennedy and his bunch have been saying they actually mean the same thing. And if you're born here, you're a citizen. No, you're not. And Mr. Trump is absolutely 1,000 correct again. He is going to deal with birthright citizenship and declare that your being born here might confer citizenship on you, assuming your parents owe allegiance to this country.
Well, that's what we call in the business a fantastic segue, Richard, because we are talking about, former President Trump, now current president, starting on Monday. Several on his team have suggested, this is reported by Politico, that they're planning a flood of immigration executive orders on day one, come Monday. And one of those executive orders has to deal with birthright citizenship. Can President Trump use executive orders to end birthright citizenship? I would understand that this would either take a ruling from the Supreme Court to actually define what Section 1 of the 14th Amendment means, or a separate constitutional amendment. Your thoughts? Can this be done unilaterally through executive order?
It has, because it's already been misconstrued by the executive branch. You'll recall now, when it comes to people coming to this country, the president has carte blanche. He's been given power by the Congress that he and he alone can decide who comes in and who leaves and who can be sent out and who can have their visa removed. It is carte blanche that the president has extreme or plenary power over that issue.
Because most immigration issues are handled by the State Department, and the State Department and the Secretary of State is subordinate to the President of the United States.
That's right. And the other thing now, I don't know if we mentioned the Chemerinsky case yet, but one of the things that the Chemerinsky mentions here that he finds abhorrible, is there such a word?
It's nice. It's horrible and abhorrent together. I like that.
What he finds that he's so worried that Mr. Trump is going to deal with this, and one of them is ending birthright citizenship. I say, hooray, Mr. Trump, do it, because we need to have people in this country that owe allegiance to this country. That is to say, they're faithful to the values of this country. Who would want a country otherwise? I can't imagine.
Yeah, it's because also, it's a fact of life that you see a lot of illegal immigrants come to this country, or even legal immigrants for that matter, first generation, who then send remittances back to their home country.
Absolutely.
Taking money out of the United States economy and put it back in their country of origins economy. And so we're also seeing several other promises.
What about their Oregon, Mike? I don't get that one.
Also, we're seeing a large-scale deportation effort. Apparently, it's going to start in Chicago. ICE agents, there's been some quotes from some ICE agents who've been deployed to Chicago. And also, we're going to get into this because we're up against a break right now. President Trump will end the Biden administration's humanitarian parole program for some residents of Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. Okay. This program was introduced by the Biden administration to discourage migrants from trying to cross the border illegally, offering a way for more than 500,000 immigrants from those countries to enter the United States.
Mike. That's another thing I wrote for the Daily Journal. They did publish it. It's self-deportation, and I predicted it, and it's happening now.
It's interesting, but also this Trump program where you're like, it's like, okay, we're going to let you rob the store so you won't rob the store. But we're going to talk more about immigration and, the new regime coming on Monday, folks, right after the break. Stay with us. And we're back in the Legal Lounge. Once again, thank you so much for spending some time with us. We're talking about this leaked report about some of the executive orders that President Trump plans to enact day one, which is just a couple days away. And we talked about eliminating some of former President Biden's pro-illegal immigration policies. We've talked about ending birthright citizenship. He's also talking about reinstating the Remain in Mexico policy, which would, when asylum seekers come, they would to the border, and they would need to either remain in Mexico or their country of origin before they could gain entry while their asylum applications are being adjudicated.
Yes, and again, we've talked about this before, but Mr. Trump is not necessarily pro-tariff. He's pro-tariff threat. And basically what he says to a person or a country is, we want this. If you don't do it, we're simply going to tariff the hell out of your products. We are a big country. We consume a lot of things. You, to a certain large extent, depend on our consumers here.
Yeah.
I'm in control of the consumption of this country. You either do A, or we're going to tariff your goods. Now, people will say, well, yeah, but if you tariff products, it's inflationary because everybody now has to pay more money. Yeah, but we don't necessarily have to impose it. We just threaten it, and guess what? They always come through.
Also, I mean, it's you can let the free market handle that. And when it comes to tariff inflation, like for example, he's not going to say like all light bulbs in the entire world are getting tariffs. What he can do say is light bulbs coming from China are going to get tariffs. And then some guy in Germany is like, hey, you know what? Bright idea. I'm going to start making light bulbs in this factory, and we have a better way to do it, where we can actually sell it at the same price or cheaper than Chinese light bulbs. And now we're buying German light bulbs.
That's exactly right. Very, very, very good thinking.
Well, thank you very much. One more thing that we should talk about for this segment vis-a-vis immigration is kind of a schism going on in the MAGA world. Steve Bannon, I guess we can call him friend of the show.
Yes.
He's former chief advisor, and he was pushing for a temporary moratorium on all immigration, Richard, including temporary and travel visas. Mr. Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, who are going to be the Doge guys, they are not a fan of that. They love H-1B visas because Elon at Tesla and SpaceX and Vivek, wherever he worked before, they used a lot of H-1B visa holders, specifically engineers and computer scientists from India and China, because there's just not enough skilled, qualified engineers. Are we team Bannon here, or are we team Elon?
Mr. Trump is going to have a problem because also Mr. Trump has a position of he's not anti-electric vehicles, but he says let the market decide. On the other hand, Elon Musk is pro-electric vehicles.
He owns the company.
Makes them.
Yeah, he does. Yeah.
So we're going to, again, this is democracy, if you will, or a free republic at work. This is exactly where it should be battled out. I will tell you this much, though. Whatever Trump decides, it is not going to cost Americans jobs. And that's what he's mostly concerned with, that maybe we'll do both. We'll allow so many electric cars, but no special compensation.
No tax rebates or anything like that.
That's right. And I think Elon Musk will agree to it, and he will basically make a function out of that whole thing. Again, Trump's bottom line is he's a practical politician or a practical person, and he will do everything it takes to benefit this country. If it's possible, it may be a situation where there isn't much he can do to help certain people.
But I also, unlike some of the the Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, Joe Biden guys who were like, oh, you lost your job in this factory, you need to learn to code. Like that was, I think, disastrous for the Democratic messaging. Right. I think he's gonna.
That is so elitist.
It's very elitist, Richard. Yeah. And you've seen a lot of pushback from David Axelrod, who was President Obama's Svengali, political Svengali. Right. He said publicly, that you can't do that. You can't talk down to the American people like that. And what he lays, Kamala Harris's terrible candidacy and Joe Biden's terrible administration, the fact that the messaging from the Democratic Party is so elitist.
Yes.
Real fast about electric cars too, Richard.
Yes.
We're seeing some reports now with all these fires that have happened. Where a lot of people here in California have a lot of electric cars.
Yes.
That the EPA is like really sketched out about like all these electric cars have burned with all the hazardous rare earth metals and all that.
Right,
So that's something that you need to think about too. Real fast on this this Elon versus Bannon thing. I think that both of them make good points. Yeah, Bannon, we want to see Americans have those nice American engineering jobs, but Richard, we don't make good engineers here anymore, right?
No, we don't.
And that's the fault of the American education system, or just because young people are lazy?
It's both, because there's nothing wrong with the brain power of our young men and women. The problem is they've been talked into going wherever they could go to make the most money. And that is business administration and so on. In fact, I don't know how many young people I've talked to, and they're in college. And what are you studying? Biz ad.
Yeah.
This guy might be smart enough to get all A's in physics and math, but he chooses not to because it's difficult. I got my bachelor's degree in physics, but the problem with that is physics and mathematics are very lonely subjects, so to speak. You really can't talk to your dad or your grandfather about differential equations. Nobody knows that stuff. But you can talk history to your parents and your dad and your grandfather at no end.
And if you're a good BS artist, what you can do is you just make arguments about history and about anything subjective, where math and science is objective. My little cousin, she graduated from college a couple of years ago, and she's studying for the MCATs right now, which is the entrance exam to get into medical school.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, what are some of the sample questions? Is it like, like how to crack this guy's chest, or like, how many? What's CPR stand for? No, it's all of the MCATs. It's all science. It's all biology. It's all chemistry. It's all physics.
Yes.
And if you really want to, become a doctor, help people, but also make good money, you're going to have to know that kind of stuff. All right, Richard, we're going to come back right after the break and wrap things up. Stay with us. We're going to talk about Huntington Beach. Stay with us. And we are back in the Legal Lounge wrapping things up. Richard, we talked a couple weeks ago about how, Gavin Newsom, the haircut, and, Banta here, and Merrick Bass, they're like, oh, we're going to be the resistance to Donald Trump. We're going to pass all these laws at the state level and the county level. We're going to, stifle Mr. Trump's agenda. Huntington Beach, not so much. Huntington Beach seems to be like, a bright spot here, a bright red spot, you might say, in deep blue California, because Huntington Beach actually passed, has sued California over the sanctuary state law. Your thoughts on this lawsuit, Richard?
Yes, well, we have an article here about Huntington Beach is suing California over the sanctuary law. And very briefly, the city of Huntington Beach sued California on Tuesday, claiming that the state's sanctuary state law violates the supremacy clause of the U.S. Constitution and federal immigration laws. Now, what's interesting about this is you actually have a city able to call on the U.S. Constitution.
Yeah.
So Huntington Beach will not sit. Now, this is a quote from the mayor. Mayor Pat Burns. Now, Pat, it could be male or female, but I think it's female. Huntington Beach will not sit idly by and allow the obstructionist sanctuary state law to put our 200,000 residents at risk of harm from those who seek to commit violent crimes on U.S. soil, Mayor Pat Burns said in a statement. The complaint seeks declaratory and injunctive relief to invalidate the state law. The state law happens to be SB 54, known as the California Values Act. Now, I want to make one comment here, Mike.
Okay.
The complaint that they're seeking is declaratory and injunctive relief. Now, what that basically means is they're not asking for damages, but declaratory relief simply says we're asking the judge to make an order saying that AB 54, for instance, is unconstitutional. A declaration about what the law is, period.
Yeah.
No money, no jail time, nothing. And the other thing as an injunction saying, and it cannot be enforced after such and such a date. So what they're asking for is certainly proper. However, as you read the article a little bit further, there is some argument that maybe this SB 54 has already been thrown out by previous courts. I'm not sure that makes sense. I read it. It doesn't quite make sense. But to the leaders threatening to get in the way of immigration. Now, this is coming from Tom Homan. He's in the same article. President-elect Donald Trump's border czar has said federal authorities will need the help of local authorities to carry out its deportations. He has gone so far as to threaten local officials with arrest and prosecution if they thwart ICE's mission. One last thing, Mike. To the leaders threatening to get in the way of immigration and custom enforcement, don't cross that line. Homan warned publicly while at a speaking engagement in November in Texas. It is a felony to knowingly harbor or conceal an illegal immigrant from immigration authorities. Don't test us.
Yeah, wow, strong
now,
language.
One other thing I want to say, though, is it looks like we're going to find little pockets of people who will help the immigration people. That's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
So even if Huntington Beach doesn't win their case against California, you're going to find them actually helping Homan.
Yeah, also Huntington Beach passed a voter ID law, too, which is interesting. We're going to talk about that probably next week. Richard, we got about a minute before we hit the break. We want to give our thoughts and to friend of the show, Rudy Giuliani.
Absolutely. Rudy and John Eastman. Mr. Trump, I'm begging you, please do something to help these guys. Maybe you're already going to do something, but for sure, both of these attorneys worked their rear ends off on your behalf, and they're both in deep trouble. And I think as time goes on, we're going to find out that what they did was zero, just like in your cases. But please do what you can to help them.
Very well said, Richard. All right, we're out of time. Richard, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And thank you so much for people listening, watching live or after the fact. You can check out Richard's book, America: An Illusion of Freedom. It's available on Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, and on iTunes. And we'll see you guys later here in the Legal Lounge.